Have you ever heard of the National Cabinet? It's been in the news lately, and it's a new body created by the Commonwealth and the States. Hello everyone, my name is Renato Costa, this is AussieLaw, and today we will answer the question, is the National Cabinet a real cabinet? If you are subscribed to our channel, you will probably remember that in my previous videos I explained the composition, the elements of the executive in Australia. We talked about the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, but what about the National Cabinet? The National Cabinet is a brand new body that was created in the year of 2020. And although there are still some discussions about what it really is, I would like to take a moment to talk to you about the composition, the history, and also my impressions about what it really is, the nature of the National Cabinet. So we can divide this video into three parts: the name, the origins, and if it really is a cabinet or not. The first thing is that even though you call it a cabinet, doesn't mean that everything that relates to a cabinet will be implemented here. So although this is the National Cabinet, it's not a cabinet, at least it's not the federal cabinet. The federal cabinet is composed of ministers of the federal parliament, ministers that will form the federal government. They are responsible to the House of Representatives and are elected, they are chosen directly by the people of Australia as a whole. The National Cabinet is composed of the Prime Minister, the Chief Ministers and Premiers of the states and territories. And so, whereas the Federal Cabinet, all of them are responsible to the same Parliament, here in the National Cabinet, each one is responsible to a different parliament. The Prime Minister responsible to the House of Representatives, the federal parliament, but the premiers will be each one responsible to their own state's parliament. So this new thing is definitely not the cabinet, the federal cabinet, because each one of its members is responsible to a different parliament and is part of a different cabinet. Since everyone is coming from a different place, this is actually an intergovernmental body. Let me tell you a little story. There was not long ago something called the COAG, the Council of Australian Governments. It worked as an intergovernmental forum aimed primarily at adjusting some economic policies. The National Cabinet was created and became sort of a substitute to the COAG. In fact, it is the new COAG. During its creation in March 2020, it was stated that the aim of the National Cabinet was to coordinate and deliver a consistent national response to COVID-19. So its main responsibility is to provide for actions and decisions related to the pandemic. It is a coordination between the different levels of the Federation in response to the issues related to the COVID pandemic. However, in May 2020, the Prime Minister announced that this body was going to become an ongoing body. So, although it was created to deal with the issues arising from the pandemic, it is now an ongoing body, a permanent intergovernmental forum, just like the COAG. So you may think, why not keep the COAG? Why create something new? Well, the main answer to that question would be to say that the COAG had become something so big, too bureaucratic, too many people making decisions, so sometimes it's just easier to press the reset button, right? And the National Cabinet had a different aim. It was designed for a different purpose. Well, fine, it was created, it exists, but it's not the COAG and it's not the Federal Cabinet. So, what is it? Look, this may sound a little too out there, but this is not a cabinet. The conventions that we have just discussed about cabinet solidarity, cabinet secrecy, they do not apply to this national cabinet. The implications coming out of the Convention of Responsible Government, they don't apply here. And of course they don't apply, because as we've seen, the members of the National Cabinet, each one of them is responsible to a different parliament, not to the federal parliament or not to the same parliament at all. This is not a cabinet in any of the senses that we've seen so far. And that's why Professor Gerald Saunders said that on no view is this body a cabinet. What presently is called the National Cabinet is a group of government leaders heading different cabinets through which they are individually and collectively accountable to different parliaments and different configurations of the people for the exercise of different powers. Use of the terminology of cabinet is misleading. It may readily be accepted that an intergovernmental national cabinet requires forms of solidarity and some respect for confidentiality. However, the framework to address these dimensions of its operation should be crafted to fit this distinctive need, not imported from a conceptually different source that leads to confusion regarding the true nature and powers of the national cabinet. I must say I totally agree with Professor Saunders, but even before I conclude this video, I should tell you two things that just happened recently and are very important to cover the topic that we are dealing with. One, a decision by the Administrative Appeals Tribunal of Australia, the AATA. And the second thing is what followed from that decision. An initiative from the Commonwealth Parliament to draft a bill that would include certain regulations that related to the National Cabinet. So, let me briefly make some comments about these two things. The matter before the AATA was brought by Independent Senator Patrick Rex and was decided by the Honourable Justice White. The decision provided many reasons why the National Cabinet could not be considered a real cabinet. The decision even says that the National Cabinet is not even a committee of the Cabinet. According to Justice White, among other things, Cabinet committees derive their powers from the Cabinet. Generally, Cabinet committee decisions are brought forward to the Cabinet for endorsement, so the Cabinet retains the ultimate power of decision. And this is not the case with the National Cabinet. Further, paragraph 149 makes it evident that the National Cabinet does not derive its powers from the Federal Cabinet. It also shows that whereas in a federal cabinet and in cabinet committees, the Prime Minister will be the leader and arbiter, that's not the case with the National Cabinet. Also, the decisions made in the National Cabinet are not taken to the Cabinet, to the Federal Cabinet for endorsement. This is another feature that's completely different from being a committee of the Cabinet. And we have not even mentioned the lack of Cabinet solidarity and Cabinet confidentiality, which are implications of the collective responsibility coming from the principle of responsible government. This decision was obviously a huge defeat for the government and for the National Cabinet. So, the Commonwealth Parliament decided to draft a bill and propose amendments to the COAG legislation to introduce new things and new regulations that would include the National Cabinet as a cabinet or as a committee of the Cabinet. Look at what it did. It defines Cabinet as a committee of the Cabinet including the committee known as the National Cabinet and a committee, however described, of the National Cabinet. That amendment bill also makes provisions to guarantee the secrecy of the National Cabinet documents. For example, it changes subsection 31(1) of the Archives Act of 1983. It adds the National Cabinet documents in the idea of a cabinet notebook, guaranteeing therefore the confidentiality of those documents. This bill is clearly a parliamentary fiat to escape the effects of the decision of the tribunal. But hey, it's Parliament, right? They have to do what they have to do. So, what does it all mean? Well, the National Cabinet is a sui generis body. It is an intergovernmental body that will help the cooperation and coordination of the different levels of the Federation in Australia to deal with matters of national importance, particularly to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. But what will come from there? Well, we're still to see. So, what are your thoughts about the National Cabinet? Is this a real cabinet or not? Leave a comment below, I would love to see them. And if you like this video, don't leave without clicking the like button, subscribing to our channel, and also clicking the bell icon. I will see you next time. Until then, ciao.